Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, so it is Writing Wednesday, where I'm here to answer your writing questions. It is almost Thanksgiving, and I'm very excited. I like Thanksgiving, and especially this year, a friend of mine who loves to cook and is really upset that she can't have all of her friends over for Thanksgiving the way she normally does. Decided she is going to cook for all of her non cooking friends and spend Thanksgiving with her son driving around delivering Thanksgiving dinner to all of us. So I do cook, but I'm not going to cook a turkey for 3 people. So she's gonna. My daughter's a vegetarian, so 2 people, and all the sides and stuff. She likes to really do it. She's a great cook, and so she's gonna cook the big turkey and all the sides and all the trimmings, and they're gonna cut them up into portions and take them around town to their friends. So I'm very happy about that, and I'm wearing my Thanksgiving shirt. I wear this shirt exactly once a year. Um, I have had it since I was 19. A boyfriend gave it to me in college, and I used to wear it more, but now I do want to wear it just at least once a year. I'm super attached to uh, rituals and that kind of stuff. In personal life, you'd be surprised. And so every year I take this out and wear it. So all of the Thanksgiving pictures in my album all look the same because I'm wearing this, but I'm getting progressively older. So it's that's sort of interesting. Um, I thought I would talk today about inspiration because I've been feeling somewhat uninspired this last little time. It comes and goes. You write whether you're inspired or not, but inspiration is like a plant that needs to be watered. And in some seasons, it doesn't require a lot of watering, and in some seasons, it requires heavy watering and fertilizing. And I think I'm getting into that period. So I want to say hi to everybody for showing up. It's good to see you. I did want to say that I'm going to be teaching the art of the sentence, my sentence class. I have dates now. It's January 22nd to 24th, so after the inauguration. And the link is up on the communityofwriters.com, .org. Um, so if you want to sign up, it's live. The links are live. So please, I didn't come with questions today, so anybody who wants to put a question up in the comments, I am happy to answer your question today. I am thankful for you. I'm thankful for your coming to hang out at Writing Wednesday every noon. It's been a couple of years now. I started doing it when I think when Chimes of Lost Cathedral came out, so that's been 2 years. So I've been doing it, and it's grateful for that. Grateful for the technology. If we weren't in the middle of, if we didn't have Zoom and Facebook Live and all this crowdcasts and this and we would be pretty lonesome in a lockdown. So this is, I'm grateful for that. So I did want to say that the class, the class I'll be teaching, weekend workshop in the art of a sentence. And sentences are tough, they're delicate things. We're going to be looking at how style is created, because style is in the sentence. It's something people don't think about. I didn't think about when I was a young writer. I try to do things that were stylish, but I didn't have much of a sense of what I was doing. And it's taken a long time for me to, it took a long time for me to understand that style is about the sentence, the syntax of the sentence, the word choice, diction. There's a lot of stuff going on in a sentence that I just didn't think about. I fell in love with sentence diagramming. I'm terrible. I'm a history major. I took in junior high we had sentence diagramming. It was painful. It was horrible. But when I became a writer, I started realizing the importance of the sentence. Then I really wanted to get in there under the hood and see how sentences were put together. And we'll try doing some sentence diagramming, but I'm not very good at it. It's just a doorway. It's a way to get into the sentence. So if you want to try it, I always recommend everyone have a book of basic grammar. Grammar. Who teaches grammar anymore? Do we get that in the schools? I don't think so, because it's boring and it's hard. You're a kid. You just want to go out and make some hell. You don't want to sit there learning about subjunctives, and I still don't know what that is. But I do have a basic composite book of grammar, just English composition. This one's from Barnes and Noble from probably the 70s. 1961. It doesn't change. And it has a chapter on sentence diagramming that I find fascinating these days. Because it gives you an idea of how sentences are put together, kind of their physical structure. It's like being, not caring about physiology until you become a massage therapist, and suddenly it's really interesting how everything's put together. So anyway, the workshop dates, Christy, hi. It's January 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, and it's up on the communityofwriters.org page. So it'll be right after the inauguration, and I think it'll be a good weekend and good energy. So I'm going to take a look at your questions and let's see what I can help you with. So do you want us to get examples of our favorite sentences from books so that we can analyze them? You do it now, do it whenever. Always do that. Your favorite sentences, notice. But we'll be doing them together with some things that I've pulled for certain reasons. And then afterwards, you'll be doing it to all your writers that you love. What are some techniques that are helpful when you're not feeling inspired to write? Yeah, this is what we're going to talk about today, is inspiration. Yeah, I'm running low. The inspiration, sometimes it's self-generating, and sometimes you have to water the plant. And right now, I'm in desperate need of watering the plant. You get lazy, you forget to keep pulling more oxygen into the tank, and the fish are they're not looking so good. Yeah, that's where I'm feeling right now. So inspiration for me comes from different sources. One of the difficulties we're having with lockdown, I don't know about you, but I basically go nowhere. I'm lucky to go out once a week to the market, or not even that. Just forcing myself to go out and take a walk and with the unmasked people and stuff. It's so enraging that I often don't do it. But inspiration often comes, you have to leave the house and go out. And so because the randomness of the universe coughs up things that you can't imagine, you have to be there and looking for it, noticing it. And the looking for it and the noticing and the writing down stimulates the imagination, stimulates observation, stimulates inspiration. So if you can force yourself to go out there, put a mask on, stay away from the crowded areas, and just, see if you can see something amazing, and then get your notebook and write it down. And then get home and put it on your computer in a notebook and print it out and put it in the binders. Other ways of inspiring yourself for me is reading things that aren't just for pleasure, quote unquote, which means kind of reading for pleasure, means reading for many people, means reading things that don't take much work, don't take much mental work. But that's not what gives you inspiration. That's what puts you to sleep and is comfy and, you know, cuddly and kind of like a ugly sweatsuit of reading. But inspiration comes from reading something where somebody has an idea that you wouldn't have thought of, but that blows your mind. A form, a structure, a way of writing. It can even be, it can be a book that you would never write in a million years. I read this one. Oh man, I did a book talk with him at a bookstore. A little Somebody and the Wolf, it was called. Girl's name and the wolf. Very small, very spare, and just very sophisticated, and a kind of literary risk-taking that is inspiring to me. It's not necessarily what I'm going to do. I don't write those really pared down, kind of postmodern things. You know, that's not what I write. But, you know I've quoted Mayakovsky before, but Mayakovsky, the poet, the Russian poet of the Russian Revolution, really, the poet of the Russian Revolution. After the revolution, there was a big controversy of whether this avant-garde writing, where he came out of, should be funded, or whether those people should just go to work, typing, or, sweeping the street, or digging a hole, or whatever, whether they should be funded. And there were many radical writers who felt that, if the people, if the average person, if the factory worker wouldn't enjoy it, it should not be funded. It should not be printed. This is where you get socialist realism, that they want to see themselves and something easy to read, easy to digest, what we're talking about, pleasure reading, what we would call in this country, because we're a capitalist country, and forget these avant-gardists. But Mayakovsky, because he was a real artist, said there's poetry for the producer and poetry for the consumer. And so the stuff that is written for the factory worker and the the nurse maid, all the kind of people who were recently literate in revolutionary Russia, they can't make heads or tails out of this avant-garde stuff that the futurists would write, and the formalists, and it's like, what do you do with a poem by Mandelstam? It's like, I can't even begin to understand this. Who cares about that? But Mayakovsky said that you need the poetry for the producers, for the poets to read, to inspire them, who can then, thus inspired, can create maybe the more easy, consumable type of art, which still remains art because they are inspired by the great avant-gardists who maybe only other writers would read. And so, but literature needs those writers, needs those avant-garde writers to put new oxygen in the water for other writers who will then produce work for the mass. So if you're writing like me, I tend to write for everybody. Hopefully I write for everybody. Hopefully I write for both the other writers and the consumers of sophisticated literature, but also I write for people who just want a good story. But I still want it to be art. I still want it to be, to strive towards, something fine. I'm working hard. So I have to be able to read things that inspire me so that I can write what I write. And for me, so it's often demanding work. It's not easy to read often. It's work that challenges me, but it also inspires me. It excites me in a way that a more conventional work doesn't. Because the newness of the ideas, the freshness, the excitement of that really new way of looking at the world, a more avant-garde, a more way out there uh, idea can inspire so much more. It's just something you like, quote unquote, often puts you to sleep. It's why I did the sense class. Some of you actually took that class. When I did the sense class with the community of writers, one of the things we did was we listened to music that we didn't like. And I said, many writers listen to music they like when they work, as a way of kind of drowning out ambient sound. But when you're looking for inspiration, you're often better off listening to something you don't like, because it stimulates you in a way that copacetic stuff doesn't. It's like it wakes you up. Stimulation, it wakes you up. It's like, I hate this, and it's like suddenly you're hearing it. You can't stop hearing it. You hate it. You're reacting strongly. You're getting a reaction. And then that stimulation often gives you inspiration. It doesn't mean you have to read, something you really despise, or you don't have to necessarily read, but you don't want to be put to sleep. You're looking for that heightened awareness, and something unusual, something that's not easy to devour, something that fights back a little bit, something that you have to engage with the work, is where you can get inspiration without, getting COVID. You have that inspiration, that conversation with your things you're reading. So it's if you don't have much of a library, or you tend to have all the books you like that are just yummy, yummy, but not a lot of challenging work, try to spread out a little bit. Even if you're going to use the library, borrow books from friends, go, order in a bookstore you don't have to go anywhere. You can do it through your computer, usually. And find things you engage with. I mean, for me, some of the more stimulating things I've read, Calvino, it's not what I write. It's very avant-garde, imaginative, alter worlds. But man, you get a new idea when you read Calvino, when you read Borges, when you read, I like Fernando del Paso, Palinuro of Mexico. I was just talking to a writer named Jeff Jackson, who is an avant-gardist, about Palinuro of Mexico. It's so different than anything you've seen, and really lively. There's a whole publishing house called Dalkey Archive. Their publisher just died. That's what brought it to mind. And they have some of the most interesting books out there. So if you even Google, Dalkey Archive, and look down at some of their books, reading Carol Mazo, reading Ricky Ducournay, Jeanette Winterson. I mean, these are writers that that I find really inspiring. And then I also find authors that are really inspiring, or character figures in regular life whose attitudes are so passionate, impassioned, and such strong personalities, that I find just reading about Louise Nevelson, the sculptor, exciting, and gives me ideas. Reading of anything by Patti Smith. She's a collagist, and a kind of she's really good on elegy, things that have passed. I find her super inspiring. Reading about art, painting especially, photography, painting, very inspiring. Certain lives are very inspiring, and I don't write memoir. Uh, I don't write nonfiction, but I just find the interesting paths that some people have taken is inspiring. So you can be inspired on the word level. I read a lot of poetry. Be inspired by avant-garde fiction, inspired by people's lives, really interesting people, outspoken. I mean, I've watched certain movies about people, bios. There's a biography of Diana Vreeland called The Eye Has to Travel. I own that. I watched that over and over. There's one about the sculptor, ceramicist Beatrice Wood, who was part of the original Dada movement. And she lived in Ojai. She lived to be like 105. And what a character, and what a life, and the passion, and the commitment, and the joy. And so that's called Mama of Dada. And I own that. I've watched that a billion times. So characters who are, Henry Miller, I really find inspiring. Anais Nin, the groups of writers, groups of artists who come together. I find that always very inspiring. How artists kind of are created in constellations. I think that's one of the things that Roberto Bolaño in The Savage Detectives, it shows a group of young writers together. I find that is super interesting, always inspiring to me. Groups of artists. Edward Weston had a whole group around him. So he's interesting. His lovers are interesting. There are three. Marguerite Mather, who taught him photography. Tina Modotti, who he taught her photography, and she became a major, major photographer. And then Cheris Wilson, who was his great lover, the model for many of his iconic works. And their relationship was very interesting. And he lived in a world of other artists. So the richness, not in money, but in relationships, just beautiful. And Eisner as well, and Miller, Durrell, it was a whole constellation. I find that very inspiring. Any pocket of passion in the world, if you can dip into that, I find that inspiring. There's a Russian ballerina, Diana Vishneva, who I think is the most wonderful dancer alive right now. And just to watch Vishneva dance, do Carmen, or just any of the modern works, or any of these wonderful, there's a film on Tina Bausch, Pina Bausch, who is a modern dance choreographer, and just miraculous. My husband, who didn't know anything about dance, saw this movie and said there's more ideas in like 10 minutes of this movie than you see in 10 years of other people's work. He writes for television. And he's just so, he found it incredibly inspiring. So you look for what excites you. You can feel the physical rush of, I want to work. I got to take notes. I got to deal with this now. You don't get that with kind of, a good enough novel. But you want the real excitement of reading something that is stimulating you to the max. So that's how I do it when I'm not feeling inspired to write, is I have to find the nutrients. You go out in search of them. You don't just notice that their fish are dying. You got to put some oxygen in the water. Okay, here's a question from Mary. Hi, Mary. Oh, good to see you on Writing Wednesday. Look at that. Mary joined us for Fiction First Aid, and there's going to be another Fiction First Aid on the 5th of December, because people had been asking for a weekend version of it instead of Friday. So this will be a Saturday, the 5th of December. So Mary was there. Interior monologue. How much is too much or not enough? Interior monologue. Okay. it's very important to know that characters do not have monologue with themselves. That is like the worst. Do not do interior monologue. When a character is thinking, they just think. They don't have to say anything in their minds. Instead of saying, do you think it's too much? Do you think I should da-da-da? As an interior monologue, just say, was it too much? Should I stop now? Period. You don't have to do it as conversation. So none at all is much better. Have just regular old thought. All right, here's one. Sentences are whole obstacle courses of syntax chaos for me, Christy said. I'm teaching The Art of the Sentence on the weekend of the 22nd of January through the community of writers. Christy, come join us. We are just going to rip into sentences, and you can really see how this is going to make writing a lot more interesting, easier, and just a stronger sentence styles in the sentence. Yes. Date, yeah, the January 22nd to 24th. Do I have any words of wisdom about flashbacks in the novel? Flashbacks. Okay, I think that you have to think about how people think, because your flashbacks are going to be reactions to something that the character sees in the present. There's always a link to the present. And when the character goes inside and remembers something, remember that the front story continues, that they still are physically somewhere having those thoughts. So if you're going into a reminiscence, say you're in a coffee shop, make sure you come back into the body occasionally. So I'm in a coffee shop and I've just gotten an email from Robert, and I haven't heard from Robert since college. I sit down with my coffee and I think about, maybe I look at my phone and there's that email from Robert, and then I go and I start thinking about Robert, and then suddenly people burst into laughter at the next table. Brings me up back into the scene. And then I'm in the scene, and then maybe I'll go back and do a little more of Robert and then come back. So always back to the scene, in, out. So that really helps. Sometimes a flashback is just a paragraph, half a paragraph. It doesn't have to be a full scene, a full chapter. If you're going to flash back, try not to do it at the very beginning of the book. Establish where we are. Yeah, and most writers will do this. The first chapter gets us in, and then maybe the second or third chapter goes back. But I like to break up the present and the past. So you're in the present, you're in the past, you're in the present. You can go anywhere in a character's mind, but the more active the scene, the more engaged the character is with another character, say, or with an exploding, pot or whatever, car crash. They're not going to go into a long backstory while, their furnace is melting down. So you always have to see how urgent the scene is. And also think about the fishing line. I keep giving you this metaphor, is you're always fishing for the reader's attention, and you want to feel a slight tightness on that line at all times. Sometimes you can let them go a little bit, but if the line gets too slack, you will lose them. So you have to be careful when you do go back in time to have a sense of how much you can go back without losing the reader. And so you're developing a sense of that. Let's see. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Okay, so Miranda asks, she spent the pandemic writing a screenplay. Any advice on writing a novel or longer short story from a screenplay? A screenplay and a short story are like the Venn diagram is very good. So think of your screenplay as a short story. It is. I think it's a short story without interior, without description, without a lot of the tools or the opportunities you have in fiction. Not everything has to be said in fiction. So you could cut a lot of the dialogue, but basically you do have a short story. Cut most of the dialogue and use the other tools. And it doesn't have to be as tight and, as tidy an ending. It can be more mysterious. But I think a screenplay is a very good place for a short story. My husband writes short stories, and he's a screenwriter, a TV writer, and he's written a number of stories from screenplays, and they've been wonderful. Novels, it's unpacking, because it's like writing a novel based on a short story. You have a short story will be either a piece of it, it'll be the opening of a novel, it'll be maybe the climax of the novel. You have to figure out, where it's a matter of opening that story out. And so, yes, I think that's a, perfectly good thing to do. So Marla says, studying Ray Carver's work, I read about the debate surrounding were his stories literary? Oh, God. Yeah. His not only literary, but really inspiring, really tough. These are stories where about people who do worry about the rent, who do worry about, alcoholism and marital problems, and just like real people. And they are stripped down, and there's some controversy about that. He had a very famous editor who cut him to the bone. But we don't think any less of him because he worked with this editor, Gordon Lish, who cut him to the bone. We don't think less of Eliot because Pound cut him to the bone, because that was a pretty darn good collaboration. But yes, Raymond Carver are super literary, and just because they're spare, that's a style, and we'll talk about style. Maybe I'll do some Carver in that class. There's as much style in the spareness, more sometimes, because it's all about control and what you leave out and how you handle information. Hemingway is not any less literary or Didion because they are masters of the minimal, of the spare sentence. Cormac McCarthy. Yes, literary is any story that resonates long after you've read it. Literary, I think, because stories can resonate just qua story, but I think, as story, they can resonate just because you remember, the cardinal and the queen, you remember the bedroom scene or something, But literary work is work that excites you sentence by sentence. It excites you on the sentence level. What the character is doing, how they frame their thoughts is what makes it literary. So, again, art of the sentence. Just ordered the Socrates Express. That's interesting. So Jen says she gets lost in the backstory scenes. Yeah. And then if you find you have too much backstory, maybe you're telling the story the wrong way. Maybe the backstory is the story, and the front story is just a framing device. You might think about that. Stories like books like Evening by Susan Minot. M-I-N-O-T, Minot. About a woman die. It's always on your deathbed, right? That's the framing. Oh, the dying woman, and she thinks back to a love affair that she had. And it's a wonderful book. So it's about the love affair. It's not about the dying woman. What else? What else can I tell you about? So inspiration is sometimes just having some new ideas. Get restless if you haven't had a new idea for a long time, haven't been faced with a new idea. Look for some lively writing where somebody has an interesting idea, not just a how-to book or but some people have interesting minds. They think they think in an interesting way. That's often inspiring. What else can I tell you? And generally, when you're talking about literary work and writing for the producer, this is what we find in the literary journals. This is why the literary journals play such an important part in the cultural life, the literary life of a country and of our time. That's where the writing for the producer is published. So it's a good idea to find like at least one or two literary journals that you want to subscribe to, that you find work that's sufficiently interesting, inspiring to keep track of. Because that's where the literature of our times is being made, not on the bestseller list. It's going to be in the literary journals, the interesting ones, the really good ones. And there's so many of them. I just bought the new, there's a new all LA issue of Zizova, one of my very favorite literary journals. And you're going to see some wonderful new writing in there. Work in translation often will give you brilliant new ideas, to go to another country, another whole set of values, another whole way of looking at the world, opens your head, just the way travel does. And we can't travel right now, but we can travel in our minds and to read book by somebody from Poland or Finland or Mozambique. You're traveling and you're seeing the world through a different set of lenses. And I'm not saying that these are things you should emulate, because you're not from Mozambique, guess what? But just opening those creaking doors of fixed ways of thinking in your mind it gives new oxygen to the water. Suddenly your goldfish are looking a little better. Think of your mind as tropical fish. They can't just leave them forever. You have to keep new oxygen in the water. You got to feed them well. You have to clean the plants. You got to get in there and keep it clean. Some of my favorite poets. Oh boy. I have so many favorite poets, and for different moods almost, like music. I like poets that sound like something. I like poetry aloud. So I'm very fond of Sexton, Joseph Brodsky, Eliot. I like, oh my God, there's so many wonderful poets. But I tend to go for sound. Wanda Coleman. I'm reading a lot of Wanda Coleman right now. What a strong voice. I like Marina Tsvetaeva. I like a lot of Russians. Mandelstam, Tsvetaeva, Mayakovsky. Sound. Oh my God, you read that stuff out loud. He informed Marina Makarova, my poet protagonist, in the two Russian novels. I love, there's so many. Dylan Thomas, you talk about sound. You can hear him read. He's been recorded reading his own stuff, and it is just rapturously good. You know, I mean, listen to Brodsky read his stuff. It's just incredible. Sexton, oh my God. So I tend to like that. What do I mean by the literature of our time? Well, it's literature that's being written now that will reflect the temper of our times and the temper of our thoughts, that engages with language and issues and you know, some people only read classics. I had one friend who said, "Oh, I don't like to read living authors. I like to read because I want to read all of them, and if they're still writing, it bugs me because I can't complete." And it's just like, are you kidding? You don't read any. And he was probably in his 40s when he said that. You know, you're missing the literature of your time. That you're going to, the times are going to be, the concerns of the time are going to be reflected in that literature. Let's see. So Jen's novel over a span of 5 decades. So time and flashbacks may need reorganization. Yeah, and there's no law saying you have to do it chronologically. You can start at the end. You could start somewhere and flash in different parts of a person's life. I mean, look at an interesting book is The Lover by Marguerite Duras, which is an older woman who is looking back at an incident, at a moment in her life as a young girl, but also flashes all over the place because she didn't stay there. She grew up, she changed. So that's interesting. The name again of the journal you especially like, Zyzzyva, Zyzzva. So they picked it because it was the last word in the dictionary. So Zyzzyva, the last word. So that's a really good one. What else can I ask? Yeah, so poetry I like is poetry will give you a new word, a new. Sometimes the poets are incredibly brave. If you read Sharon Olds, she will pull you into a scene, an event that is almost. Sometimes they can be so intense it's almost unbearable, and you couldn't read a whole story like that. But a poem can go right to a moment and really unlock a moment into all the facets. Moment opens up like that. I really like Sharon Olds. I really like Derek Walcott. God, his book Omeros, which is retelling Homer. It's the Iliad, set in the Caribbean with these. One's a fisherman and one's I don't remember what the other guy was, a carpenter or something. And Helen was a waitress on the beach. A whole novel in verse, unbelievable. I like Anne Carson. The Beauty of the Husband is a book of her poetry about jealousy. Oh my God. I quote it in my mind all the time. See, I'll be thinking of poems. The first book I ever bought myself with my own money was collected Carl Sandburg. There was a long poem in there, I think 78 little pieces, called The People, Yes. And it has a refrain, the people, they move in a fine thin smoke, the people, yes. And how really applying to our times. What is a nation? I think he's the logical heir to Whitman. Ginsberg, you could say too. But I think for a certain kind of American voice, Sandburg. I love Sandburg. So Sandburg, Dylan Thomas, Eliot, Brodsky. kind of odd bedfellows, huh? But they have a sound and a sensibility, Sexton. I don't know. There's some hidden signature in there that you might be able to figure out. So if there's nothing else, still taking questions. I have a few moments still on the clock. So still happy to take. You know what? Cummings is such a visual poet that I find I like him, but I don't find that I love him. I crave him the way I crave other poets. I tend to like poets for the ear. They get into me in a certain way. Isn't that interesting? I'm sure that'll change, though. I'm sure, someday I'll stumble open my Cummings and I'll go, oh my God, how could I have lived without this? That happened with Sexton. I used to think Sexton was sort of a poor man's Sylvia Plath. And then I heard her read her stuff, and suddenly it's like, I still like Plath, but I found, oh, Sexton. Now there's what I really, really responded to her. Plath, amazing. Ted Hughes. I used to think of Ted Hughes as the man who killed Sylvia Plath. But I started reading him, and he is a remarkable poet. Oh, just wonderful. So, sometimes you change your mind. As you get older, you change your experience. You don't accept other people's opinions quite as dearly. And you keep trying, and you find sometimes it's like, wow, I was wrong about that one. Here's one from Tony. Hi, Tony. Happy birthday. What do you do to get in a mood to write a certain scene, like a first romantic meeting or particularly heartbreaking scene? Oh, my goodness. Well, I have soundtracks that I develop playlists on YouTube. They're private, usually. I've locked them down. But of music that will stimulate the mood of that scene. When I was working on Chimes of Lost Cathedral, there is a love scene, a relationship, sexual relationship that develops between my character and an unlikely source. I'm not going to spoil the book in case anybody wants to read Chimes of Lost Cathedral. I don't want to spoil it for you, but I actually developed a movie soundtrack for their love scenes that have to have a certain mood, very specific mood. And I put them on I made a YouTube playlist, but you probably could make a Spotify playlist or burn a CD if you're still doing that. And then I just played it over and over and over when I was writing that. When I was writing Painted Black, I had to stay in a really tough place because it's the aftermath of a suicide. And I was really depressed when I started writing the book, kind of savagely depressed. But, a book takes 5 years to write, and I'm not savagely depressed for 5 years. I started feeling better. Then I had some problems of how do you keep the tone even when you are changing your mood? So I made a playlist, the saddest songs in the world. And sometimes when I couldn't get there emotionally, I would play that tape, saddest songs in the world. And there are a lot of Leonard Cohen, a lot of Joni Mitchell. What's the saddest song in the world? Janis Joplin singing Summertime. It makes me cry every time I hear it. But I had a playlist for my Russian book, for both of them, Chimes and The Revolution of Marina M. There's a violinist, Helen Callis, who had a whole Prokofiev program. And Prokofiev was very much some of the soundtrack. Prokofiev was like the last in Russia, because of this thing about things had to be produced that the average person enjoyed. That certain forms that became kind of worn out in the West, people weren't interested in melodic classical music anymore. Once Schoenberg comes in with 12-tone music, he blows up classical music, and you get Shostakovich in Russia, you get, Stravinsky, but you were still allowed to be melodic in Russia because of the huge audience that was favored by the government, that you had to make music that the average person could enjoy and come out whistling. They didn't do that. They haven't had to do that in the West, since the turn of the 19th century, really, maybe a little later. But Prokofiev, he actually scored movies. I mean, he has such a strong melodic line. And so to me, that was just like there was some Shostakovich, but it's very so hard to write to. It's a little too much. So there's a lot of Prokofiev. There's some Satie, because there's a certain nostalgic tone to it. There are certain renditions of Russian folk songs. There's a wonderful jazz singer named Sophie Millman. She's Canadian, and she's Russian. Her family's Russian, and she does a cover of Dark Eyes, Ochi Chornaya, in Russian, but jazz. And I have that on the list. Oh my God, I just love that. So yeah, I do. It helps when I need to kind of recreate that a mood. I have a whole playlist for different books. But also, not so much Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky is kind of a pre-revolutionary guy, I didn't feel Tchaikovsky there. Prokofiev was my Tchaikovsky. I did. What was I going to say? What did I? God. I was going to say something about music and just reinforcing, and the poets are the same way. I mean, I heard Brodsky, when I was writing my the Chimes of Lost Cathedral and the Revolution of Marina M. I heard Brodsky, I heard Tsvetaeva and Mayakovsky very, very, very strongly. The poets I read really affect Akhmatova. The poets I read really affect what I'm writing. Everything I write usually has a couple of poets that inform that language. Let's see. So this is a question. Lauren says that Rupi Kaur is a very visual poet. Interesting that you prefer poetry through the ear. It's because how I want to use it is I want that music in my head so that I am creating music on the page, and I want the music. Visual poetry doesn't help me as a novelist. Doesn't have an effect on my fiction. I don't write that way. The ear was developing my ear for language was a really important part of my development as a writer. There's a very interesting guy, if people are on Twitter, there's a really interesting artist who's called I Am Detour. He's a young guy who lives in Denver, and he does these wonderful videos of his work, of his painting. He's does a lot of murals, and he used to do performance art, where he's painting in real time that people can watch him create. And he just put a video on YouTube about for students, art students, who are getting impatient with their inspiration. They're getting impatient with how slow everything is, and he breaks it down. He says, look, you don't learn all this stuff all at once. You have phases. You have a phase where you're copying. Artists do that first. They copy other artists. They sketch. You know, they're learning really the tools. So they learn it by imitating other artists. Then you go into an experimental phase. Then you go into this phase, that phase. You don't learn it all at once. And, you know, when I was in my mirroring phase, my copying phase, you know, I should have gone into I should have known that there were going to be these different phases. I just wanted to write and get sold and be on the bestseller, you know, not the bestseller list. I didn't care about that, but I wanted to be published. I wanted my short stories in the journals. But I wasn't working the craft. I didn't know that you should start by copying other people and seeing what they're doing and breaking it down and looking, you know, really thinking about how does Poe create that creepy, anxious feeling? Let's look at that sentences. Can I do that? Can I do a Poe sentence? How would I put that together? You know, so I missed a lot of those stages. So that was an interesting thing I came across. So if we have no more questions, I just want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Again, I'm teaching the art of the sentence through the Community of Writers Weekend Intensive, January 22nd, 23rd, 24th. We're just going to look at sentences. And because style is in the sentence. And then on the 5th of December, there's going to be a fiction and memoir first aid on a Saturday. This is the first time that you know, people have been asking, can you do one on the weekend? So we're doing one on the 5th. Alex Espinoza and me and Dana Johnson, short story writer and novelist from here in LA. And there's always 4 people. Who's our 4th? Oh, and Sans Hall, who is a wonderful memoirist and teaches really nice, really good memoir classes. So the 4 of us will be doing that on the 5th of December. So there's a couple of classes coming up and sessions and things to think about. And I wish you much inspiration and a happy Thanksgiving to you all. Okie doke. Bye.